So I'd like to really ask you about the 1926 hurricane.
Sure. Let's look at it, overview very briefly, and then get into the flooding elements, because it was a flooding hurricane, which sounds almost redundant, but I mean, this thing was heavily flooding. So the hurricane came in two phases. The first was very destructive, September 17th. It was dawn when it was over, phase one. People came out. They went to the MacArthur Causeway, then called the County Causeway, to assess damage. Some had taken refuge on high ground in the Brickell Avenue neighborhood in a funeral home, ironically, and they traipsed back over the 2nd Avenue Bridge, which was a very low-lying bridge at the time, and to go back to their homes, because a lot of people lived downtown. And then lo and behold, phase two came. And Richard Gray, the weatherman, the U.S. weatherman, was out in the streets downtown telling people, get back in, this hurricane is not over, the worst part's coming. He knew the eye was coming. The eye's kind of calm, but right behind it says fury. And
how would he tell them?
He had literally got out and screamed. That was the only way. There's no radio to do that for him, or waving newspapers or whatever. And
where was he?
He was down on Northeast First and First, which is just a block away from the heart of downtown. That's where the weather service was. And get in, it's coming, and it's going to be worse than, let's use my phrase, phase one. And it kind of came through. It sent a water surge from Biscayne Bay across the brand new Bayfront Park, through the first floor of the brand new Everglades Hotel, and another block or two west of there. The water surge lifted the Miami River over its banks, especially its north bank, which would be the downtown side of the Miami River, lifted a Coast Guard cutter up on the land. Altogether, there were probably about 100 vessels that were lifted out of the water onto the land, either in Bayfront Park or the Miami River. It forced the Seabold Canal to overspill its banks. It left a flooding in what today you call the center city, especially at today's Flagler Street and Northwest 12th Avenue. And it was a major intersection for what was called the Riverside neighborhood, today's East Little Havana. And that was flooded for days. Remember, now, it was two phases. So the first phase kind of beat up things. The second phase was worse. And the second phase trapped a lot of people on that 2nd Avenue Bridge, on the MacArthur Causeway. There were well over 100 deaths in greater Miami. There were 50-plus deaths in Broward County, which was very small in terms of population then. Flooding was, to my knowledge, very severe in the downtown areas of Miami, in the Riverside neighborhood, as I mentioned before, Miami, and in other parts. And that water was on the surface for several days. Well, they got caught out in the storm, and many died, I think, because of drowning, because they were on bridges, the MacArthur Causeway, the 2nd Avenue Bridge. A lot died from flying debris that hit them. Tens of thousands were homeless. So once those homes went down, so many of the homes were made out of wood frame, and they were like matchsticks to this storm. This storm's winds were well over 130 miles an hour in some parts, during some parts of the storm itself.
And it hit downtown.
And it hit downtown. And that's where the population was really centered, downtown and these nearby neighborhoods. So it was really right on target for the population. Dade's population reached 2 million in approximately 1994. So Andrew hit in August of 92. So they were close to 2 million people at the time. Just think of the impact of that versus the hurricane of 26, where Miami, the city, had probably a little over 100,000 people. So there's so many more that are impacted by that. Yeah. And of course, had Andrew, it was bad enough what it did to the Homestead Air Force Base, Burger King headquarters, Deep South Dade in general, Kendall, many parts of it. But if it hit downtown, it would have closed downtown and probably closed much of the city for a while. Yeah. It was so destructive. But with rising waters, the chance of additional hurricane damage becomes much more severe, because now you got waters almost up in our faces, and it would be really catastrophic. But
again, anticipating, say, 100 years from now.
Well, it's interesting
with that 8 to 10 sea level rise and a Matthew or hurricane hitting us directly, category 5, let alone at king tide. We'll just quote you on that.
It's just almost inconceivable. Maybe it's better that we're the ages we are. It's interesting because we've got a national administration, not just the president, but much of the conservative Congress that's in denial. We've got a state administration that I consider very unenlightened about almost everything. They're in denial. But The local areas that are being impacted by it are not in denial. They have no choice. You're going to let people die or drown?
Or property values sink.
Property value, yeah. So you got Miami
That
Beach.
really gets at people.
It really does. So Miami Beach is girding against it. They've already spent, I don't know how many scores of millions, with many more to come, with pumping, with elevating streets. And the mayor of Miami, and this really surprised me, a week or two ago, his last proposed budget. He's term limited. He's in his last of 8 years as mayor. He says, it's coming, and we're going to need hundreds of millions of dollars to build walls against Biscayne Bay and to begin to think about pumping. There's only a certain amount you can do in terms of stopping private development, and that's, we're Americans. This is not a totalitarian dictatorship, so we had the wherewithal to do that. And I guess if people buy these things, which I think is silly, there's a demand there, builders are going to build. I really think, as a layman, that rising waters are coming, and they're coming fairly quickly. And I'm just not sure what we're going to do. There have been so many articles on how vulnerable among every place in the United States, this appears to be the most so, the peninsula in South Florida for rising waters. So it's a mess. So it's a mess. So it's a mess. So it's a mess.
The way I think of it is that the Kissimmee River drains into the lake, and the lake itself terminates with a shallow sort of southern rim, and this sort of gives way to the very shallow Everglades. The lake itself is shallow, between 3 and 9 feet of water.
The Everglades are really a naturally flooding area.
Absolutely.
Supposed to be water.
Absolutely. There is water. There's more gallons per acre here than anywhere else in the world. And right now, everything with the historic flow of the Everglades, where it was, should be under between 3 and 9 feet of water right now. Right now, we're standing in a lake bed right now. We should be above our heads in water. We are manipulating the landscape we have drained the Everglades. A man named Hamilton Diston came here and drained the Everglades by dredging and making the canal system. So all the water that should be all around us right now is in the canals, and it drains out to the coastal areas. Well, the Hoover Dike holds back the water of the lake, and tries to keep it under control and keep the people safe from a fate like the people who suffered in the 1928 hurricane experience. So, and archaeologically, we understand that people who have lived in this part of Florida have always had to adapt and adjust to the presence of inclement weather and its relationship to water. Certainly hurricanes gain their deadly capacity from picking up power from water. And so in 1928, there was kind of an interesting situation going on in Florida in general. People were, there was an economic boom going on. It was before the Great Depression, and people were literally selling real estate by the gallon out here, and people began to settle here in this area in the Glades. And it's interesting to me to look back through some of the archival newspapers, 1926, 1927, and see accounts of, there was a rainstorm last night and there was lots of flooding, or we're bailing this out and that out, and yet the confidence on the part of the people who lived here that they had it all under control, that they were able to sort of be the masters of the environment, that persisted for a long time the way it persists today, because people forget the hurricane of 1928. That's my experience. People don't know what happened here in 1928. They can't imagine thousands of people losing their lives in a single event.
The two Martin girls hung on. When Thelma's arm tired, she passed the baby to Ernestine and then took him back again. Back and forth, they passed 2-year-old Robert, Beside them, Hattie struggled to hold on to her own brother until a large wave carried the boy screaming off into the night. With Robert weighing heavy in her hands, Thelma turned to Hattie and asked her to hold on to the baby. "You hold on to him yourself," she yelled. Her own grip on the root was precarious, and she was scared. She felt her grip slipping and began to grab on anything, first at the slippery roots, then desperately at Thelma, holding Robert above her head. Thelma pushed her away, afraid she would grab onto Robert and drown him. Another wave surged up and over them, and then Hattie was there no more. The only light was the lightning.
The lightning.
Dark clouds,
Right,
the
can't
wind's
see the
blowing,
moon.
the water smashing the face, there's stuff floating around. You don't know, it's scary.
It's chilling.
Yeah, really.
Wow.
It's not just, a nice big wave you can surf on. I don't think so. Oh, Lord, please save my only son, Henry murmured as he felt his strength giving away. Then something hit his back, and they stopped moving. "Daddy, I've got hold of a telephone pole," Sonny cried out. Henry let go of the post and grabbed onto the top of the uprights of the telephone pole. The water was 15 feet deep. Exhausted, Henry wrapped his arms around Sonny and locked his legs in the crossbars and held on for the rest of the night. Basically, think about just taking a house, crushing it, and then throwing it into the water. That's what it was. 2x4s, flooring, plumbing, just everything, roofing. It's just all floating down. It's bobbing up and down. It's being thrown around at, at so many, scores of miles an hour. And you're trying to swim in that stuff? Good luck.
What do you do with all those bodies? Several thousand bodies.
Well, first thing, there's what, 3 feet of water, for 20, 30 square miles, whatever it is around the lake. So you couldn't bury anybody anyway. And the only place that was high enough, because the dike had gone, was the railroad bed, which was raised. And they would put the bodies along the railroad bed, and then people would slosh through the water trying to identify them. But if no one identified them after 2 days, they started rotting. They put them in trucks, and the only road that went to West Palm, they took them to West Palm. And if they're white, they put them into a casket and brought them over to the Woodlawn Cemetery. If they were black, they took them over to Tamarind and 45th Street, and they threw them into a hole there, where there was a steam shovel that would dig out the hole. They'd throw the bodies in, they'd bury it again. And there's something like 741 people were buried there. And in Woodlawn, I think it might have been 70 or 80. I forget how many white people there. But they stacked them up three or four coffins, and one on top of each other when they buried them. But and they kept finding bodies, and they'd go out in boats, in the motorboat, and they get the body. They tie a rope around the ankles, and they get 4 or 5 bodies, and they drag them in. They call them grape bunches, because they just look like a bunch of grapes behind these boats. And they take them in. They stack them up. Where if they're black, they put them one area. If they're white, they treat the bodies differently. And of course, then after about a couple of weeks, the bodies, they're just finding body parts, and those are what they really burned. They didn't burn the body so much, they burnt the body parts. So they just get big bonfires and just set them all, ablaze, because there's nothing else you could do about them. And then they took the ashes and they buried them up in Port Mayaca up between Okeechobee and Pahokee. So there's 1,600 buried there. And what I did, I went around, I said, look at this, 1,600 here, there's 700 here, there's 300 here, and I just added them all up, and they added up to over close to 3,000. Not counting Sebring, they buried them in Sebring, they buried them all over the place. And the official count was 1,871. Just that number alone, think about it. That number alone just sounded too precise. Because even the 36 hurricane, all the other hurricanes, they were 400, 650. They were very round numbers, but this one wasn't. And I was thinking, why do they have this exact number when obviously you just add up all the bodies around and you find out it's more than that? Well, I think when it got to close to 2,000, they got scared and they wanted to stop it. They did not want a storm that killed that many people to be known. Why? Well, what is Florida built on? It's built on 2 things: development property money and tourism. And a hurricane that's killed 2,000 or 3,000 people is not conducive to attracting tourists or property investors. That's why it became the forgotten hurricane, and no one wanted to talk about it.